Good morning. It's a pleasure to stand here in front of you this time, not as the building coordinator of this church, but in my real profession, which is to be a pastor and theologian. And of course, it's also a pleasure to work together with Simone and to be here in the midst of summer in this good climate. The feeding of the 5,000 is the only one of all the miracles that Jesus did that is recorded by all four Gospels. So it's a great classic within all the Gospel stories. I remember it from my childhood, and I think that it was in a children's Bible illustrated with a pencil drawing that the feeding of the 5,000 made its first impression on me. It was the children's Bible by the Dutch writer Anne de Vries. Some of you may know this edition of the Bible, and it was used by my parents in order to educate their 4 children at home. Some of you will know this gospel story from their early childhood as well, probably most of you, be it by looking at a children's Bible like me, or by listening to it in church school, or wherever this may have been in one of the many places around the globe we are coming from in this international congregation. The feeding of the 5,000 is a great classic in Christian education. Miracles appeal to children, and they do it even more if there is a boy involved, as it is in our story, because it is none other than a boy who brought 5 barley loaves and 2 fish to the meeting, whatever have been the reason why only this boy was so somehow anticipating that he was prepared for a longer sermon. It is a boy who enables Jesus to do the miracle. What could be better to show to children that they have their place in the gospel and in the church? Miracles please children, but are they recorded for adults as well? In my life, at least, after the early fascination by Jesus, who transcends the boundaries of usual human beings by multiplying bread, for me there came a period of struggling with the miracles in the Gospels. A bit like it, the way it was summed up by the German theologian Rudolf Bultmann, who famously said that we cannot use a radio and believe in the ascension of Jesus at the same time. The radio stands for scientific progress by explaining and transforming everything according to the laws of nature. And according to Bultmann, we cannot trust the laws of nature in everyday life by using technical tools like a radio, and at the same time believe in miracles in which the same laws are overthrown. And overthrown they are when a small number of breads and fishes is multiplied by thousands from nothing in order to satisfy 5,000 hungry people. It was sometime during my time as a university student that this obvious clash between the miracles in the Bible and everyday reason disturbed me. Faith against reason? I remember trying to alleviate that clash at least a bit by interpreting the miracle in our story differently. There was no multiplication of bread and fish, but Jesus made it the way that everyone was feeling satisfied, even after getting only a crumb of bread. In this case, the miracle would have been, so to say, not in the baskets, but in the stomachs, and at least a bit easier to reconcile with laws of nature. But this attempt to alleviate the story doesn't work. The gospel reminds us that there was a real multiplication of bread. Jesus somehow indeed created thousands of loaves of bread almost from nothing. Everyone got his stomach stuffed, and there was so much left that the bread that was left over by the crowd was enough to fill 12 baskets. No chance to bring this in agreement with the chemical principle of mass conservation, as it was discovered and formulated by Lomonosov and Lavoisier in the 18th century. This comes from Wikipedia, no worries. I'm a theologian, no chemist. Yes, there is a clash between Jesus' miracles and the laws of nature. But today, being no longer a university student who wants explanations for everything, I take a much more relaxed stand towards this clash. Jesus, in the end, is the Son of God, the creator of heaven and earth, including all laws of nature. So why the Son of God should not be able to suspend, at least from time to time, the laws he himself has created. Therefore, I am not disturbed that much anymore by the suspension of the principle of mass conservation in our story. And I don't want to spend too much time in this sermon with the miracle side of our story. I feel confirmed in this approach when looking a bit further in the story that unfolds beginning with the feeding of the 5,000. John is the only one of the four Gospels in which the miracle is followed up by a sermon from Jesus. And actually, this sermon, the remainder of chapter 6, will be the topic of the next 3 sermons here as well. Not done by me, but Andy told me this will be somehow our topic in August. And in this sermon, Jesus puts his miracle into perspective. He says to the crowd searching for him, and this is in verse 26, so not that long after our passage, "Very truly, I tell you, you are looking for me not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves." So Jesus understands that the crowd, on the bottom of their hearts, was not so much touched by the miraculous sign they have witnessed, but by the fact that they were nourished. We find this kind of putting miracles into perspective several times within the Bible. It resonates well with what the resurrected Jesus says to Thomas after having proven to him his resurrection. "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe." So those who haven't seen miracles and still believe in God, they are the ones who are blessed. And there is this other word from the Gospel of Luke that fits in well here as well. "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced even if someone rises from the dead." So even a big miracle as a resurrection would not be enough if someone has not in his heart some interest in believing. With all this, Jesus wants to say, spectacular events like the multiplication of bread and fish, and even the resurrection of someone who was dead, will not suffice to be a solid foundation of faith. Witnessing a miracle, if it is not accompanied by the right attitude, will not make someone a follower of Jesus. And these sayings by Jesus are pretty much evidence-based. Already at the end of his sermon on the bread of life, which follows up the feeding of the 5,000, many from the crowd and even some of his disciples leave him because they consider his teaching too difficult. They left him despite having witnessed the miracle. And later on, when Jesus was charged of treason and blasphemy in Jerusalem, the whole crowd asked for his crucifixion, notwithstanding the spectacular healings and miracles many of them had witnessed. Belief in the spectacular can vanish very quickly. not only in the old times. We may think in the present times of Emmanuel Macron, who was welcomed almost like a messiah when he took office in France, after having assembled crowds of cheering supporters during his election campaign. Okay, I think he didn't feed them with thousands of loaves of bread from nothing. But still, there was some kind of almost adoration going on. And these people coming to him believed that he could change France for the better. Not much of that enthusiasm and belief is left currently. So people in France, people in Judea, and I would say people everywhere, are rather people who tend to forget the spectacular when it comes to the daily lives and the struggles they have to overcome. Very truly, I tell you, you are looking for me not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. If we take this word of Jesus seriously, we must conclude that faith is not about seeing wonderful things, but about eating. Faith is about eating, not about seeing. Sounds bizarre, but there is a deep truth in it. It has to do with the difference between an outward and an inward experience. And here I want to talk about John and me. And you are really in the manuscript, John, so I was sure that you would be here as a faithful church goer. And so let's imagine I come home later and I speak to my wife and I say, I have seen John in the church. My wife will conclude that John was in church. John and I may have said hello to each other, but that's pretty much all we think of when seeing somebody. It's a completely different story when I would say to my wife, John and I talked to each other. Talking involves an exchange, a deeper attention between us. And it may even lead me to let sink in some of John's words. I may also ruminate and think his words over. And John and I would go even further when accompanying our conversation by a common meal. If I said to my wife after this service, or after later today, I must say, I shared a meal with John at Burger King, she would know that we had some kind of deeper exchange. Well, I would not go that far with John as eating parts of him. This would be a bit too much of community. But it's obvious that eating means a total different form of sensual perception than just seeing. My inner self is involved and not just the outward appearance. I may get sick from a burger, and I may, the other way around, feel refreshed from what has entered my stomach. After having eaten it, the nourishment is part of me, for better or worse. Therefore, when Jesus says that eating the Word of God is better than seeing and admiring incredible miracles, he warns us not to base our belief on outward appearances. Seeing a miracle once and again won't be enough to nourish our belief, and it may even mislead us, because it would lead us to the idea of an event God, who would be a completely different God than the one we find in the Bible. In this perspective, Jesus' interpretation of his own miracle resonates well with a story we find in the Old Testament. The prophet Elijah just had performed a great miracle by producing heavy rain after 3 years of drought. However, his persecution by King Ahab and his wife Jezebel continued. Elijah fled and he asked the Lord to die. It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my ancestors. We may call this reaction from Elijah a true sign of burnout. Despite all the miracles he had performed, he felt despair. His resources were empty. What follows is amazing and actually one of my favorite stories in the Bible. Let's listen to some verses from 1 Kings chapter 19. Then Elijah lay down under the broom tree and fell asleep. Suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, "Get up and eat." He looked, and there at his head was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. He ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came a second time, touched him, and said, "Get up and eat, otherwise the journey will be too much for you." He got up and ate and drank. Then he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. This story shows very well that our life, like the one of Elijah, is not about seeing and performing miraculous things. What we all need is a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. Some rather basic things provided to us by God's care and attention. However basic these nourishments are, they give Elijah the force to overcome his burnout, to build up new trust and energy, and to go for a long walk. It is fitting that he encounters God at the end of this walk, having reached the Mount Horeb. And there the Lord appears to him not in a storm, not in an earthquake, or not in a fire. No, the Lord appears to him in a sound of sheer silence, or as another translation puts it, in a gentle whisper. A gentle whisper, some warm cake, and a jar of water provided to him. That's how Elijah encounters God. We may call this encounter a miracle as well, but it is much less spectacular than what the crowd around Jesus witnessed and expected also in the future. The Christian God is not an event God. God distastes the spectacular. He nourishes us in a much more basic way just when we need it most. That's what we can learn from Elijah's story, and this is also the bottom line of the gospel story that tells us how Jesus fed a huge crowd with only 5 breads and 2 fishes. It is not the miracle as such that is important, but it is the fact that God gives us steadily all we need, our daily bread, be it in a spiritual or in a very basic physical way. God is a giving and caring God, and those who believe in God will see wonderful things. And the peace of God, who transcends all understanding and all laws of nature, may guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Amen.